rock and roll at that point was like very kind of a blue jean, you know, drum solo kind of a situation.
It was like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, you know, Elton John.
You know, Supertramp, Jethro Tull.
You don't have to be able to play the bass like. I mean, rock and roll is not jazz or classical music. It's rock and roll. It rocks and it rolls.
By the early 70s, rock and roll seemed to have been drained of excitement. A new injection of energy was needed, and it came from a small Skid Row bar in downtown Manhattan that was to become one of the most famous clubs in the world, CBGB's. The groups that made their names there added a new one to the rock lexicon, punk. But the new music didn't emerge fully formed. Its roots went deep into the 60s New York underground of pop art, experimental cinema, and avant-garde theatre. At its centre, the fairy godfather of trash, Andy Warhol.
You don't have to do anything.
But Warhol was growing tired of his creation.
In 1970, Andy started to become more involved in the Bianca Jaggers and the Jackie Onassis of the world and moved on to that type of scene. And so a lot of the underground superstars are sort of like out there left floundering, the ones that were still alive.
The newly redundant superstars, along with assorted underground characters, began to gravitate towards an area of the Warhol universe that had been unpopulated since the late 60s, rock music. One graduate of avant-garde theatre became the lead singer of the most important New York band since the Velvet Underground, the New York Dolls. They arrived on the scene when there wasn't a scene.
There weren't really any clubs to play in. We would go around and try to get people to let us play in their bar, but they weren't accustomed to having music, so there was really no place to play in those days.
The first important venue for original bands was opened in 1972, the Mercer Arts Center. Dolls quickly made it the focus of the new underground.
I mean, the word went like wildfire through the scene about the Dolls. It took less than a year for those guys to land a record deal because it was so hot.
We wanted to kind of put that kind of Little Richard flashback into it. We would find stuff that was really funny, like old Courage stuff from like 10 years before. And then like we would buy shoes at the Nun store on Delancey Street. They're kind of like men's shoes, but they got like a Cuban heel on them, but they're for nuns. You know, it's like the dawn of like the feminist movement, and it was the dawn of the gay rights movement. So it all just kind of like merged into one kind of cauldron of polymorphous pansexuality. We started playing at the 82 Club, which was this old-fashioned drag bar. And there was these two old dykes who ran the place. And the one behind the bar's name was Butch, and she talked through one of these voice box things. Hey, you know, those squawk box things. So we were on stage singing and playing. We looked like a bunch of Puerto Rican sluts at this point, you know. I mean, drag, but we looked like, you know, we could slit your throat kind of drag. And we're playing the first song, and I can see Butch, and she's going like, rah, rah, rah. I can hear this squawk coming out of a box, but I can't hear what she's saying. So when the song ended, I like leaned over. She was tending bar, and I leaned over and said, "What did you say?" And she said, "I always said you're a faggot."
Another Mercer Arts Center regular was Wayne, now Jane County. A refugee from the Georgia Bible Belt, she was a star of the bourgeois-baiting ridiculous theater.
I had done underground plays, but I wanted to do it with music, so I had music in my bones. Rock and roll has always been in my bones anyway. So I knew that it would be really an incredible thing to combine ridiculous theater antics with rock and roll music to create this whole shock theater.
You make me clean in my head. You make me clean in my head. Every time I pass you by, can't you see the gleam in my eye?
It was taking sexuality to the extreme so far that it didn't shock anymore. I had a song called Dead Hot Mama, which was about where I made love to a silver mannequin in a casket. I mean, now it seems tacky, but back then it was quite radical, and people loved it. I had a toilet. I had a song called Shit, and at the end, I would dip down into the toilet and bring out Alpo dog food. And people actually thought it was real shit. It was not. It was dog food. I mean, even I'm not that warped, you know. So, and I would throw the dog food at the people, and I would eat it, and I'd roll around in the toilet. And people would, the reactions were like incredible.
Holly Woodlawn's Pure Garbage began life as a backing duo. Holly, who came from Miami, FLA, to star in Lou Reed's Walk on the Wild Side and Warhol's Trash, and Elder Gentile. When the band they were backing folded, they were the band.
We actually got a gig at Reno Sweeney's, which was a cabaret club. And we brought the band in there, and we did it and packed the place, and people were screaming and jumping up and down on the tables. So I said, oh, this is cool.
An acquaintance of Elder's who caught the show was the veteran of several 60s folk rock bands, now working as a Warhol hangout waitress, Debbie Harry.
I called her up and she said, oh, the band broke up. So I said, well, let's start another one. So we went over and we started forming Stilettos.
My concept of the Stilettos was to be kind of like a True Confessions magazine story, but only modern, to reflect a lot of the sexual revolution in the music and to show three women up there who were free of the bonds and chains of, you know, the classic concept of what a woman should be in society.
The next important member, guitarist Chris Stein, was borrowed from the Magic Tramps, a band fronted by Elder Gentile's boyfriend, ex-Warhol superstar Eric Emerson.
Chris came very willingly because he was crazy about Debbie. I mean, he was so crazy about her, he didn't know which way to turn, you know. He was like even get shy and flushed when he'd be in her presence sometimes.
I saw Debbie and fell madly in love with her immediately, and that was it. I just was going with the flow, as they say, and I liked what they were doing. But a girl trio with supposedly 3 lead singers is not the easiest thing to maintain. So eventually it just sort of crumbled up.
We really did do some very wonderful things. We never made any money and we never got signed or anything like that, but who knows? I mean, the scene was a different thing then.
Patti Smith had already established a considerable underground reputation as a poet, playwright and actress when she met music journalist Lenny Kaye.
The first time I saw Patti was at a Jackie Curtis play over at the La Mama Theater. And she was playing a kind of speed freak, Keith Richards look-alike. And I was just taken with her. I was taken with her style. I thought she was beautiful. She was like my ideal gal. She knew I played guitar around and stuff, and she said, you know, well, why don't you play guitar behind a couple of these things?
16 and time to pay off. I get this job in a piss factory inspecting pipe.
Yeah, it wasn't like, well, hey, let's combine rock and poetry. It was a one-shot art event that was never even meant to be repeated. And it wasn't for another 2.5 years.
Yes. Me, well, I wasn't saying too much neither. I was a real moral asshole, a hard-working schoolgirl. I feel working in a factory, I gotta earn my dough.
Like Patti Smith, the band Television also started as a poetess. Teresa Stern was a nom de plume chosen to represent the jointly written work of 2 friends who had met at school, Richard Myers and Tom Miller, soon to be known as Hell and Verlaine. they quickly became disillusioned with poetry.
It just felt like a dead end. Nobody cared. You were just kind of muttering to yourself, you know. I mean, people didn't read, and it would even embarrass me to admit that I was writing these poems. It wasn't an embarrassing thing. It was kind of pathetic.
I hung out at the Mercer Arts Center with Richard Hell and some other people, and we really, well, at least I hated these bands so much. Maybe not the way they looked or the attitude, but I just thought they sounded terrible and playing this kind of crappy blues rock stuff. And so I remember thinking, God, you know, maybe I should start a band.
I had ideas about what an interesting band of that moment would be like, what they'd look like, what kind of material they would do. And I wondered how hard it was to play a bass. And Tom assured me it was easy.
Hell and Verlaine's first outfit, the Neon Boys, was short-lived due to the lack of a second guitarist. The arrival of Richard Lloyd signalled a new band and a new name, Television.
And I remember thinking, well, maybe we should have short hair because all these long-haired bands are awful. And the ripped clothes stuff was just, nobody knew how to sew and nobody cared.
The idea was to, be the same person you were on stage and off.
The Ramones all grew up on the same block in Forest Hills, Queens, an outlying borough of New York. They quickly streamlined their stage image.
To me, that came first. How you look up on the stage, your image, how you hold a guitar. These are the top priorities. Then worry about how to play it.
The Ramones were not brothers, nor were they related. Deciding that no one would be bothered to remember 4 last names, they settled on a joint surname.
We just tried to find the instrument that we were most capable on, you know. People moved around. I mean, you know, Dee Dee started off on the guitar, and we moved him over to bass. Joey started off on the drums. We moved him to singer. We didn't play other people's songs. We were not capable of playing other people's songs. So we had to sit and write our own material. Soon we realized that we were writing songs that people thought were a little on the sick side, and they didn't really look at us as a bubblegum type of band. We were looking at like the Bay City Rollers as our competition. I guess we were influenced a lot by mental illness, things that we see around us. We couldn't really sing songs about cars and girls because we had no girlfriends or no cars.
The one existing venue for original bands, the Mercer Arts Centre, closed in August 1973 when the hotel above it collapsed. But in April 1974, Tom Verlaine stumbled on Hilly Crystal's Bowery Folk Club, and the most important venue of the New York scene was in business, CBGB Omfug. Country bluegrass blues and other music for uplifting gormandizers.
I remember in the early days, you'd walk down the Bowery, and people would just be lying literally in the streets. You'd have to step over people in the streets. And in the wintertime, you'd find them frozen to death in doorways.
It's just a hole in a wall. That's all it is.
Scotch and soda! Whoa! Yeah, partner, don't you pull no gun? We just gonna have some fun. Sweetheart, would you buy me one?
No doors in the dressing rooms, no doors in the bathrooms, holes in the wall. They had the dog there, used to take a crap all over the place.
It had atmosphere. It looked like just about anything could happen there, and I think I did see just about everything happen there at one time or another. There'd be Hell's Angels and lunatic speed freaks
throwing pool balls at you if you looked at them the wrong way in the back.
I think the look is very much responsible for the whole sort of look of punk. The graffiti, the rundown look, the, you know, rips and holes and grimy and grungy. I mean, you know, that you know, the whole punk thing.
Sweetheart, I just want one. Hey, how's the group in the second?
Nobody knew about it except a few people in New York, but all the most interesting bands in the world were playing there. You know, and we're there every week, all the time. Everybody hung out there.
Almost anyone in the audience, if you didn't know it, could stand up at some moment and head towards the stage and tune up and be a member of a band.
The last important group to establish themselves in CBGB's had begun as a Rhode Island art school band, the Artistics. The drummer, Chris France, moved to New York in 1975, along with his girlfriend, Tina Weymouth. They were soon joined by co-founder David Byrne.
We shared a kind of cold water loft a stone's throw from CBGB's, so it was pretty easy to just go over there and hang out, shoot pool, and have a few beers, and hear whoever was starting to play there at the time.
They kept going to CBGB's and asking everybody, do you know a bass player, or approaching bass players playing there and asking, will you be in a band with us? And they were all saying, no, are you kidding? Look at you guys, you're such nerds. So finally, Chris just started buying these Susie Quattro records and saying, Tina, listen to this. This is what you're gonna do. We're gonna teach you how to play bass.
And you start crying. You'll cry 96 years. You're gonna cry 96 years.
As soon as we had enough songs to play, whatever, 30, 35 minutes, we auditioned. And I think we played the following week or something, and then like 3 weeks after that, we were on the cover of the Village Voice or something. And it was kind of like, gosh, did we ever get in the right place at the right time?
By mid-1975, the CBGB scene was firmly established. It was a movement, but it still didn't have a name.
For months, there were posters all over the place. Punk is coming, punk is coming, punk is coming. And God, what is punk? What is it? And we thought it was a band. It turned out to be a newspaper.
I don't think anyone liked being called punk rockers, even though being lumped together and having this kind of handle made it easier for us all to be thought of as a movement and to be written about.
Meanwhile, back in the jungle,
CBGB's higher profile came too late for the New York Dolls. Touring had become difficult because the particular brand of Chinese heroin favoured by Johnny Thunders and Jerry Nolan could only be had in New York. An ill-advised Soviet chic stage image didn't help either.
We were somewhere in some outpost, and John and Jerry had to go to New York to get medicine, and it was like really a drag. We just decided not to do it anymore. It was funny because, you know, they kind of got like New York, they got kind of bound to New York because that's where their pharmacist was. So it really became difficult to get around. At that point, Syl and I got this tour of Japan. They wanted us to come over, and I said, well, the band broke up, and they said, well, it really doesn't matter because they wouldn't know the difference. And it was like more money than I had ever had, really, in my life. So I came home, I didn't work until I ran out of money. People would call me up and say, I want you to work, and I'd say, I got money.
Television, the first band to play CBGBs, were also splitting at the seams. Richard Hell was increasingly at odds with Tom Verlaine.
It got more and more tense the more attention we got. I wrote these songs that people, that people would call out for and stuff, but he treated that as if it were cheap, like Blank Generation and Love Comes in Spurts and Fuck Rock and Roll.
When things started to get more syncopated and stuff, or less just pumpy, bluesy, rocky or something, I think Richard started to get a little, I don't know, maybe he didn't like that so much or something, or just thought it should be more like the Neon Boys was or something.
It was really frustrating and really, I really felt betrayed,
In March 1975, Hell quit, to be replaced by the more experienced Fred Smith, who'd been playing bass with the floundering Blondie. His departure was the wake-up call the band needed.
I thought everyone else was really getting great reviews and much more credibility given, because they were taken much more seriously musically, and I was sort of looked at as being, fluff.
She just glowed, star. I never knew whether it would happen for the rest of the band, but I always felt convinced it would happen for her, one way or the other.
Darling, watch out if I see you, 'cause if you say hello, it'll mean you wanna see me in the flesh.
The Ramones, too, were about to break onto an unsuspecting world.
We would send out flyers to our soon-to-be manager, Danny Fields, and Lisa Robinson. They were journalists. We kept sending out flyers saying we're playing CBGBs, and Danny kept seeing the flyers, Ramones. He thought we were some Latin disco band or something, And he told me how him and Lisa Robinson had to flip a coin. The loser had to go see us to see what it was about.
They went on, and after the first couple of songs, his friend turned to me and said, "Who the fuck is this, the New York Dolls on Speed?" I said, "Yeah, they're the Dolls on Speed."
I didn't like them.
Mark Bell, soon to become Marky Ramone, played drums for Wayne County's backing band, the Backstreet Boys.
Wayne County brought me the album. Wayne County played the album for me. And then I sat down, I said, there's something there. I had to get used to it. There's something there, that I never heard before in my life. Whatever it was, I never heard it. I said, what is this, But then I realized that it was just a surge of power.
We couldn't figure out how to start the song unless someone counted it, I don't know how bands start the songs, really. Still, we just saying, all right, how do we start? Somebody better count.
People would go, "Every song sounds the same." I said, "Who cares?"
The shock therapy rock and roll of Wayne County was beginning to attract adverse criticism.
He wrote some really good rock songs, but he was a transvestite, and I don't think people were ready for him. Sometimes it got a little obscene. I didn't mind it, but I'm sure there was some people that did mind it, It was just a weird situation playing CBGBs at a downtown Bowery bar. as a transvestite act, you know. We were playing, and the whole place was packed, even up to the end of the block. And Dick Manitoba from the Dictators came up to him and said, you know, you're a faggot, you know. Well, you know, so Wayne kicked the shit out of him, excuse the language.
Get this. Me in a green dress and a blonde straight wig and high heels, pinning this wrestler to the floor and pounding him. It was horrible.
Inspired by the burgeoning CBGB scene, the Patti Smith group had begun to expand from a three-piece. Ivan Kral, formerly with Blondie, came in on second guitar and bass. J.D. Doherty, drummer with the Mumps, caught their act.
Patti came on, and I was totally unprepared for what I was going to see. And as soon as she got through playing, I turned to my friend and said, I want to play drums for her. You know?
What had been for over a year an art project with rock trappings now took on the lineup of a conventional group.
I mean, it always strikes me funny when people think, you know, as we got to be more of a rock band, we were getting further from our roots. To me, we were getting closer to them. When the drums came in, and we were a band. And about the same time was when we got the Arista deal. And all of a sudden we were a band with a major label recording contract, which was, you know, quite a surprise.
After the Patti Smith group was signed, people would speculate, you know, who was going to get signed next, but it was a long time between signings. We played solidly for about 2 years. I would get yelled at a lot for turning the beat around, but I just hung in there because I was kind of scrappy, I guess. There were times when I offered to leave if it would strengthen the band. I never saw myself as a permanent part of it. I was always a substitute until we found the real thing.
I can't seem to face up to the facts. I'm tense and nervous and I can't relax. I can't sleep 'cause my bed's on fire. Don't touch me, I'm a real live wire. Psycho killer, qu'est-ce que c'est?
Our music should be thought of as like a little piece of clockwork, and that we get it worked out, and aside from accidents and whatnot, it should be more or less done the same every time. And then I could emote over that, or scream, or whatever.
You start a conversation and you can't even finish it. You're talking a lot, but you're not saying anything. When I have nothing to say, my lips are sealed.
We were disturbing, like a little hard to watch. A little bit difficult to stomach, you know. Why is he doing that, you know? Why is he singing like that? Why is he squeaking? Why every time just when you think you're gonna like this stuff, does he turn around and do exactly the thing that's gonna drive you away?
After a couple of unspectacular singles, Denis Denis launched Debbie Harry and Blondie into superstardom.
Everybody forgets the tremendous amount of flack that Debbie got for being overtly sexual as a woman, whereas, you know, the guys could do it and nobody blinked.
People were saying we were terrible musically, and the only reason we got over was because, you know, I was cute or something. But I think we went beyond that.
Out of the major groups, we were the last ones to be picked up on by the immediate media. But it's funny that we went further in the long run. But everybody calls Blondie and all this stuff, you know.
Blondie's third album, Parallel Lines, shot them into the world charts. It was produced by arch popster Mike Chapman, who'd had a string of hits with the likes of Mud, Suzi Quatro and Sweet.
He beat us into this professional stance that we were absolutely unprepared for. He was like an athletic trainer where you would lift something until you couldn't do it anymore, and then you do it one more time, and that would be the right one.
The Ramones, too, were about to work with the top pop producer, Phil Spector. His legendary perfectionism failed to endear him to the band.
It's just some sort of neuroses and craziness. You can't do anything perfect. But always one song is going to be the worst song on the record, no matter what, no matter how great they all are. And then you're going to think, oh, like, that one shouldn't have been on. Maybe we could have wrote something better. There's always going to be a problem. You're never going to be satisfied. Hit the opening chord in Rock and Roll High School. He listens to it for about 4 hours. We didn't even get to even play the song. He stamps around, cursing, yelling at the producer, the engineer. Go back, hit the chord again. Hit the chord again. Listens to it for 3 more hours. This just went on all night. You know, it was just ridiculous. We had words, and then after that, we worked a little quicker, and things went a little smoother after that.
The Patti Smith Group were the first of the New York bands to embark on a major US tour. They were determined to carry their improvisatory brand of rock into the mainstream.
She always insisted that in the course of a show, we do something we never did before. And a lot of times that involved, you know, a half an hour of wandering in the wilderness.
There wasn't much illusion about what that group was about. It was about her and furthering her vision. And we were subservient to that. You know, she was a benevolent despot, and that was okay with us because we were all fans.
She never would let me play a solo the same way. And during Pale Blue Eyes, over the course of 2 months, I worked out what I thought was the perfect solo. And after about a couple weeks of playing it, she looked over me, she says, you know, I've heard that before.
In January 1977, Patti Smith sustained serious injuries when she fell off stage.
We were playing in Tampa, Florida, and on a fairly large stage that we're sort of unaccustomed to. And it wasn't lit very well, and Patti sort of wandered off in the shadows and was dancing during this instrumental part of the song called Ain't It Strange. Fell over backwards. There was a monitor behind her that she couldn't see, and went down about 10 feet, hit a steel rail, and then hit a concrete floor, you know, with her head. And I saw it happening, and it was just like, oh my God. You know, I couldn't believe it. I thought, well, she's either dead or she's going to climb right back up. And my second thought was like, shit, looks like I'm out of a job. You know, it's like...
I was on unemployment, You know, I even had to go work up at Show World on 42nd Street, running sound and lights for, exotic dancers, as we say.
Also stalled was Richard Hell. On leaving television, he joined up with Johnny Thunders and Jerry Nolan, ex of the New York Dolls, to form the Heartbreakers. But the relationship soon turned sour.
By the end of a year playing with that band, those guys were feeling towards me a lot the way I felt towards Verlaine. They thought I wanted too much control, And the fact is, I did. I finally said, it's just not worth it. I want a band where it's established from the beginning that, I'm in charge.
The solution was Hell's own band, the Voidoids. In 1977, they embarked on a tour of England.
That tour confirmed all the fears that I'd been having, that this whole racket wasn't really what I was best suited for. It was physically miserable. I had a dope habit by that time, and I was in withdrawal the whole trip. We were forced to travel England in a mini car. There were 2 in the front seat and 3 in the back. Humped over the drive shaft, or whatever it is, going down there through, driving around England, squashed together with the, trailing the Clash in their big bus when they'd learned everything they knew from us, basically. And that was offensive too, because they were doing all these anti-U.S. material, like I'm so bored with the USA and stuff, working up the crowd for that kind of attitude, and it was the height of the gobbing, and we'd all be like dripping with spittle and mucus when we came off stage, and the record wasn't actually released in England until we'd already left. The record company didn't get it together, and it was just like miserable.
Hell made one more album, then decided he'd had enough of the rock business.
The fame thing sounded cool, but it is totally empty. It makes you feel more alone. I thought it would make you feel less alone. I thought you'd go someplace, and since people knew what you did, if you had a chance to get to know them, would come to you. It would be like filtering out the people who you wanted to keep away and drawing the people who you'd have something in common with. But no, you just end up horrified by the sorts of people who identify with you. You think, God, is that who I am?
Television had released the most acclaimed first album of any of the New York bands, Marquee Moon. They followed it up with Adventure. From it came a single, Foxhole.
Soldier Boy stands, salute. He wants your orders and execute. Send him out.
Adventure was unable to live up to the expectations raised by its predecessor. In 1978, the most praised of all the early CBGB's bands was forced out of business.
I had no idea how anything worked. Like a promotional tour of Europe. When we got back, I think we would have had to have a platinum record and still not get any royalties or something, because every little cup of coffee you had in the hotel was the cost of selling a record, the royalty on the record. And we thought, oh God, So we just figured, do something else.
Patti Smith recovered from her fall and carried on where she left off. But Wave, her fourth album, released in 1979, hinted at her growing disenchantment with the rock business.
Yeah, when when she decided, yeah, let's do So You Want to Be a Rock and Roll Star. It's like, I think I know what might be going on.
But I think we all felt that there was a next step, and as a band, we'd given each other everything that we could possibly do.
After a series of smash hits, conflicts began to surface within Blondie.
Lead singers always get more attention, and the fact that, that I was the only female, was a bit of a contention.
There were tensions about everything in the band. Everybody was very young, and the other members of the band really deeply, sincerely believed. I mean, I realized now they really believed that people were as interested in them as they were in Debbie.
After 6 top 10 albums and over a dozen hit singles, Blondie folded.
I mean, Chris said something to me a while back. I came over here and he says to me, he looks at me and he says, "Do you realize the odds against us, having what happened to us? Do you realize the odds?"
In 1981, Talking Heads expanded into a 9-piece. Live shows were successful, record sales less so, and a bigger band meant smaller wages.
Chris and I came home to find that we had only $2,000 in our joint bank account, and we said, "Oh, how can this be?" And David Byrne and Brian Eno had told, we're off working on something else together. And they didn't, and it was the first time that David said that it would be a while before he would work with Talking Heads. And we didn't know how long it would be.
As a result of this enforced idleness, Tina Weymouth and Chris Frantz formed Tom Tom Club. Their first album went gold, the had so far failed to do. The film stopped making sense.
Stop Making Sense had a big effect on the way the band was perceived and the success of the band. People could go to see it and didn't have to worry about being gobbed on by punks or whatever they thought was going to happen to them. It seemed to catapult the band's popularity in a kind of surprising way.
In some ways, it kind of broke the band up, I guess. I'm not sure. Because it was like, once it was on film, it was like, I felt like David sort of said, well, this is going to tour for us. It seemed like after that, David wanted to do films and act, and that he didn't want to do the band anymore.
I had a knack for going in directions and doing things that caused tensions in the band. We got through it, but all those various things that I did, whether they were musically or creatively successful or not, they did some damage to the band.
In 1991, David Byrne announced that one of the most successful of all the CBGB's bands had split.
I did try to have some talks, but there were at one point the reaction was, if it's not good news, we don't want to hear it. So it makes it a little hard to make an announcement that way. I didn't handle it all that well. I doubt that anyone ever does. I could have done it a lot better. I'm sure some feelings were hurt. I know mine were hurt sometimes. The timing was not perfect. The way I could have communicated with others more. But, well, that sometimes happens.
The Ramones are the only CBGB's band still playing today, but even they've had lineup changes forced upon them. In 1990, Dee Dee left. Marky too had a spell out of the band.
From 83 to 87, I was trying to get rid of all my demons. That's the word I like to use. I loved drinking, and it was getting to me, so I had to leave, and it was amicable. And they couldn't take it anymore.
By 1987, Marky had driven out his demons. At the same time, one of the drummers brought in to replace him quit.
I figured that Ramones fans would probably most like to see Marky back in the band rather than seeing somebody else altogether. Heard that Mark was recovered from his drinking problem, and I thought it'd be nice to give him a second chance, and got him back in the band.
And it was good to be back because we all got along again. We ended all resentments, and here we are.
In 1981, punk pioneer Wayne County changed her name to Jane and began living as a woman full-time. She's still on the road.
I can't do anything else. I've tried jobs and things, and I'm totally useless. All I can do is rock and roll. That's what I do.
That was a long